The halls of Velroth Castle were alive with light and music, yet shadows lingered in the corners, stretching longer than they should. Torches flickered against the cold stone walls, casting dancing shapes that seemed almost alive. Courtiers in embroidered silks and furs moved with careful precision, bowing and whispering, all while the Alpha King, Kaelric, sat upon his throne like a mountain of steel and pride. His eyes were sharp, scanning, always searching for weakness or betrayal. Few dared approach him without trembling, and fewer still spoke without fear. Lysara moved silently among them. She was small, almost fragile in appearance, with hair like midnight silk, and eyes that seemed to notice everything. She was an Omega, known for quiet presence rather than power. Most in the castle overlooked her, assuming her shyness meant she had nothing to offer. But Lysara's gift was subtle, nearly impossible to see. She could sense things others could not. The faintest traces of emotion, danger, or magic carried in the air. Tonight, that gift would be both a blessing and a curse. As the court celebrated the king's birthday, laughter and music weaving together like a delicate tapestry, Lysara's senses twitched. A faint, acrid scent reached her almost imperceptible, masked by the perfume and incense that filled the hall. She froze, letting the world slow to a heartbeat. It was poison, she realized, or the whisper of it. Someone had planned to strike the king tonight. Her heart pounded in her chest, but fear did not cloud her mind. She had a duty, even if it terrified her. She edged closer to the throne, careful not to draw attention. The courtiers were too busy drinking, laughing, and performing their practiced courtesies to notice the quiet figure gliding among them. Lysara's breath caught as she moved through the throng, every step measured, every instinct alert. The scent was stronger now, almost tangible, winding its way toward the king's private chambers beyond the hall. "Your Majesty," she whispered, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. A sharp glance from the king froze her in place. He was studying her, as if sensing that she knew something that others could not. His gaze was dangerous, intense, and yet there was a flicker of curiosity there. Most people avoided his eyes for fear of being judged or broken, but Lysara did not flinch. "Do you speak, child?" His voice was deep, commanding, echoing in the high hall. She swallowed, her throat dry. I believe there is danger, Your Majesty. Tonight, in your chambers." A ripple of laughter passed through the court behind her. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some scoffed, thinking it a foolish guess. Others glanced uneasily at the king. Kaelric's expression remained unreadable, though his eyes held a spark that few had ever seen. "Danger?" he asked, stepping down from the throne with a fluid motion. His boots clicked against the stone. "You speak boldly for someone so small." Lysara nodded, her hands clenched at her sides. "I smell it. The faintest trace of something meant to harm you. I do not know who, but it is here." The king's sharp eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer, his presence overwhelming. Yet instead of anger, there was a hint of respect. "You are brave to speak this way, Omega," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Or foolish. We shall see which." Before Lysara could answer, one of the courtiers stepped forward, laughing. "Surely you jest, King. A timid little girl claims to sense poison? Let her be quiet, lest she frighten the guests." The king's gaze snapped to the courtier, cold and unyielding. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but caution is often wiser than ridicule." He turned back to Lysara. "Lead me to this danger." Fear clawed at her chest. Leading the king through the castle could be dangerous. If her warning was false, she could ruin herself. Or worse, but she could not ignore the scent. Not when the life of the Alpha King was at stake. She inclined her head, barely a whisper of motion, and gestured toward the corridors leading to the private chambers. They moved in silence, the king's imposing presence beside her like a storm contained within human form. Guards followed at a distance, suspicious but loyal, trusting their alpha's judgment. Lysara's senses flared, catching every shift in the air. The faint metallic scent of blood, the sweetness of spilled wine, the almost invisible hint of treachery, hiding behind smiles. It was a trail only she could follow. As they neared the king's chambers, Lasara stiffened. The scent was stronger now, unmistakable, a trap laid with careful hands. She hesitated, her small hand on the doorframe. "It is here," she whispered. The king's hand rested briefly on hers, an unexpected gesture of reassurance and acknowledgement. "Then we face it together," he said, his voice low, commanding, yet gentle. The words stirred something in her chest, a warmth that mingled with fear. They entered the room cautiously. Everything seemed normal. The polished floor, the candlelight flickering against the walls, the opulent tapestries depicting battles long past. Lasara's senses strained. The poison's trace was subtle, hidden within the king's evening wine. She pointed toward the goblet, trembling slightly. "There. Do not drink." A servant, pale and trembling, dropped the tray at their feet. The courtiers who had followed hesitated at the doorway, unsure what was happening. The king's gaze softened, and he took the goblet in his hand, inspecting it. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he poured the contents onto the floor. The wine hissed and evaporated as though cursed, a black mist curling upward. "Clever," the king murmured, almost to himself. His eyes met Lasara's, and for a moment, the noise of the castle faded. He saw not a timid girl, but someone extraordinary. Someone whose courage and skill had saved him when he might have died. "You have a rare gift, Omega," he said. "Few would notice what you did." Lasara's heart fluttered, caught between pride and apprehension. She bowed low, still aware of the danger lingering around them. The court would whisper, doubt her, and perhaps even fear her, but for now, she had fulfilled her purpose. The king's attention, however, was not entirely satisfied. "This is only the beginning," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "Something moves in the shadows, and it knows you, Lasara. It knows us both." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She looked up at him, puzzled. "Knows us? Trust me," he said, his gaze sharp yet unguarded. "There is a greater threat than a single poisoned goblet. The court is full of whispers, and some shadows are older than the walls themselves." The music from the hall drifted faintly through the door, but it seemed distant, irrelevant. Lasara felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them, the air heavy with secrets. She realized that her life and the king's was no longer safe in the open. Danger had a name now, and it had a face they had not yet seen. "Then we must be vigilant," she said quietly, her voice trembling only slightly. I will follow the scents, wherever they lead." The king studied her for a long moment, a slow, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging her courage. "Then you shall be my eyes in the dark," he said, "and perhaps more." His words were vague, yet charged with something unspoken, something that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts stumble. She dared not imagine what he meant. As they left the chamber, Lasara caught a faint scent on the breeze, a scent unlike the poison, sharp and cold, weaving through the castle corridors. She inhaled, heart tightening. It was closer than she thought. Someone was coming, moving unseen, and their intent was unmistakable. The king did not notice, or perhaps he did not choose to. He trusted her judgment, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle over her like a cloak. She had saved him once, but Lasara knew, deep in her bones, that the night's danger had only begun. The shadows were moving, and the king's life and perhaps her own destiny hung by the thinnest thread. And as she walked behind him, silent and unseen, she whispered a warning to herself, though her lips barely moved. The real threat is yet to arrive. The night in Velrath Castle was thick with secrets. Torches flickered along the stone walls, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to twist and shift on their own. Lasara moved through the corridors with quiet purpose, her senses stretched taut. Every corner, every tapestry, every whispering echo could conceal danger. The faint scent she had caught before the cold, sharp trace of the hidden assassin still lingered in the air. She could feel it, like a pulse running just beyond her reach, teasing her senses. King Kaelric walked beside her, silent and imposing. His presence was a heavy warmth, a reminder that she was not alone in this castle filled with unseen threats. Yet, despite his strength, Lysara knew he could not see what she could. His gaze was sharp, but it could not detect the subtle threads of danger hidden in the air. That was her role now. To follow the sense that no one else could, to protect him from threats the eye could not perceive. "The halls are empty," the king said, his voice low, almost a murmur. "And yet, the shadows feel alive." "They are," Lysara whispered. "And something moves within them. Someone, or something is here, waiting." Her heart beat faster at the thought, but she did not falter. Fear had never stopped her before. It was the quiet that allowed her to see. He studied her, his piercing gaze softening for the briefest moment. "You are remarkable, Lysara. I have faced countless enemies, yet none have had the courage to act as you have tonight." She blushed, not used to such praise from a man as formidable as Kaelric. "I only follow what I sense," she said. "I cannot ignore it." "Then we follow it together," he said, his tone firm yet reassuring. And with that, they moved deeper into the castle, past the private chambers, and along corridors lined with statues of ancestors long dead. The silence pressed against them, heavy and almost tangible, broken only by the occasional distant echo of laughter from the celebration that continued unaware of the danger lurking. The scent grew stronger as they approached the northern wing, an area rarely used by courtiers. It was colder here, the stones slick with shadows, and the air felt thick, as if the walls themselves were watching. Lysara's senses flared, every nerve alert. She could feel the subtle pulse of magic, woven into the air like threads in a web. The assassin, or perhaps the supernatural force behind them, was near. Suddenly, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. Lysara froze, and the king's hand brushed lightly against hers. He did not pull away, nor did he speak. He simply waited, allowing her to decide the next move. The closeness of his presence was overwhelming, yet strangely comforting. And for a moment, she forgot the danger, lost in the silent acknowledgement of his trust. The shadow moved again, faster this time, and Lysara's breath caught. She whispered, "There. It is here. Close." Kaelric's eyes narrowed. "Show me," he said, his voice steady. There was no fear in him, only a calm readiness that came from years of command. Lysara nodded, her hand brushing over the wall as she followed the faint scent. It led them to a small, hidden doorway, one that seemed almost invisible against the stone. She pushed it open, revealing a narrow passage dimly lit by a single torch. The scent was stronger here, a bitter, metallic tang that made her stomach twist. "This way," she said, and they stepped inside. The passage opened into a forgotten chamber, dust motes floating in the pale light. At its center stood a figure cloaked in shadow, motionless. Lysara's heart pounded. The air shimmered slightly, like heat over a desert, but colder. Magic, she realized, lingering in the room like a living thing. "Step closer," the king commanded softly. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, yet he did not advance recklessly. He trusted Lysara, following her lead. The figure stirred, and Lysara caught the faintest trace of a second scent. Subtle, but different from the assassin. It was ancient, woven with the cold bitterness of old power. She inhaled sharply. This was no ordinary threat. The shadows themselves seemed alive, bending and twisting around the figure, feeding off fear and malice. "You sense it," the king said, his voice a mix of curiosity and caution. "Do you know what it is?" Lysara hesitated. "It is old, very old, older than this castle, and it is angry." Her words seemed almost insufficient to describe the weight of the presence. The figure in the center of the room shifted again, and a cold wind swept through the chamber, carrying whispers that made her skin crawl. Kaelric's eyes flashed. So it begins. Suddenly, the shadow surged forward, more movement than form, and Lysara's instincts took over. She stepped between the king and the shadow, her hands trembling slightly as she concentrated on the sense around her. The air pulsed, reacting to her presence, and she realized something astonishing. Her gift could influence the magic, could guide it, even control it if she had the courage to try. "Stay close," she murmured to the king. I can hold it, but it will be difficult." He nodded, silent, and watched her. The intensity of his gaze made her heart race. She felt seen, truly seen, in a way that terrified and thrilled her at once, and in that moment, she understood that the bond forming between them was not just of necessity, but of something deeper, an unspoken connection forged in danger and trust. She inhaled deeply, focusing on the sense of the chamber, the cold bitterness of the shadow, the faint metallic tang of fear, and the subtle warmth of the king beside her. With a whispered concentration, she extended her senses outward, guiding the shadow's movements, bending its energy. The process drained her, and beads of sweat formed on her brow. But she did not falter. The shadow recoiled, hissing and writhing, as if it recognized her power. Lysara felt it testing her, probing for weakness. Her knees threatened to buckle under the strain. Yet she held firm, pouring all her courage and focus into controlling the ancient force. "You are stronger than I imagined," the king said, his voice a steady anchor. "Do not falter now." Her lips parted in a quiet gasp, her body trembling. The shadow surged one last time, dark tendrils stretching toward them, and Lysara flinched. For a moment, it seemed as though it might overwhelm her, but then, something within her clicked a rhythm, a harmony between her senses and the ancient magic. She exhaled slowly, and the tendrils faltered, shrinking back as if repelled by an invisible barrier. The figure in the chamber shivered and dissipated, leaving only the faintest trace of cold air. Lysara staggered slightly, weak but triumphant. The room seemed to breathe again. The oppressive weight lifting, she turned to see the king, his expression unreadable, yet the faintest shadow of admiration softened his features. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warmth that made her cheeks flush. I underestimated you." She lowered her gaze, uncertain how to respond. Praise from the Alpha King was rare, and to feel it directed at her was both exhilarating and terrifying. I only did what I had to," she whispered. He stepped closer, the shadows around them softening in his presence. "No," he said firmly. "You did more than that. You saved me. And perhaps you saved more than just me tonight." The words sent a shiver through her, and she felt an unfamiliar heat rise within her chest. She dared not imagine what he meant, but the closeness of him, the trust in his eyes, and the silent acknowledgement of her gift left her breathless. For a moment, the world outside the chamber ceased to exist. The distant music of the celebration, the flickering torches, even the weight of the castle itself all faded into the background. There was only the king, the shadows, and the quiet strength she had found within herself. But then, as if reminding them that safety was never permanent, Lysara caught a faint, foreign scent, drifting in from the corridor, a scent colder and sharper than before, carrying the unmistakable mark of someone still moving unseen within the castle. Her heart tightened. She knew instinctively that the night's danger was far from over. The shadow in the chamber was only the beginning. There were forces still at play, hidden enemies weaving plans in silence, waiting for the moment to strike. The king noticed her hesitation. "You sense something?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes. Someone else. Someone closer than before." He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Then we prepare. Together." His words carried weight, promise, and something more. Something that made her pulse quicken. She could feel the bond between them growing, fragile yet undeniable, forged in fire, shadows, and trust. And as they left the chamber, moving silently through the quiet halls, Lysara whispered a warning to herself, though no one else could hear. This is only the beginning. The real threat is yet to arrive. The castle held its breath. And so did she, knowing that what came next would test not only her courage, but the connection forming between the Alpha King and the shy Omega, who had dared to stand by his side. The castle of Velrath slept under a sky veiled in storm clouds. Though the storm was more than just weather, shadows seemed to coil through the corridors like living things, twisting and murmuring secrets that the walls had held for centuries. Lysara's senses, ever alert, were stretched to their limit. The faint, chilling scent of danger still lingered in the air. Stronger now, almost alive, she could feel it, crawling through the stone halls. A dark pulse reaching for the king. King Caelric walked beside her, silent, his cloak trailing behind like the shadow of a mountain. His eyes, sharp and commanding, searched every corner. But it was Lysara who noticed the subtle threads that even he could not see. He had begun to rely on her intuition, though he did not yet fully understand the depth of her gift. The connection between them was growing, unspoken yet undeniable. A bond forged in quiet trust and shared danger. "You are quiet," the king said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, measured, carrying weight that made Lysara glance at him. "I am listening," she replied softly. "The shadows. They whisper. They move differently tonight. Something is awakening." Caelric's brow furrowed. "Awakening? Speak plainly, Omega. What do you mean?" She hesitated. Words felt inadequate to describe the feeling. "There is a curse," she said finally. Her voice, almost a whisper. "Old magic, older than this castle. It has been lying in wait, feeding on fear, waiting for a moment like tonight." The king's jaw tightened. "A curse," he repeated, his tone betraying neither surprise nor disbelief. "Only focus. So the danger is not just from the court or a hidden enemy, but something supernatural?" Lysara nodded. "Yes, and it is drawn to you, Caelric. It has always been drawn to you." Her heart pounded as she spoke the truth. She had never been so certain of anything in her life. The air around them seemed to thrum, charged with the presence of forces unseen. The corridors narrowed as they approached the castle's northern tower, a place long abandoned except for the occasional guard. Dust coated the floor, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling, swaying gently in a breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. The king's boots echoed against the stone, steady and confident, a sound that reassured Lysara even as tension coiled in her stomach. "I trust your senses," Caelric said finally, his voice quiet. "Lead the way. I will follow." "As I always do." She inhaled deeply, focusing on the faint threads of scent that the curse left in its wake. It was subtle, like smoke curling through the air after a fire has burned out. But it carried danger, hunger, and something more, longing, almost. As if the curse itself desired not just to harm, but to consume. The spiral staircase to the tower was narrow, and the shadows seemed to grow darker as they climbed. Lysara's pulse quickened. She could feel the presence of the curse in the stones themselves, pulsing like a heartbeat that was not her own. At the top of the staircase, they emerged into a small chamber, its windows tall and arched, overlooking the courtyard below. Moonlight filtered through broken panes, casting silver patterns on the floor. The room was empty, yet the air was thick with anticipation, charged with a presence that made the hairs on Lysara's arms stand on end. "It waits," she whispered. "It has been patient, but now it moves. I can feel it." Caelric stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on the hilt of his sword. "Then we face it. Together." The words were simple, but the weight behind them carried a promise. And something else. Unspoken, yet powerful. Lysara felt it too. The bond between them, fragile yet undeniable, forged in trust and danger. Suddenly, the shadows in the corners of the room stirred. A chill wind swept through, carrying whispers that made Lasara shiver. The scent was stronger now, the bitter tang of ancient magic, mixed with something darker, more immediate. The curse was alive, moving toward them like a predator circling its prey. Lasara stepped forward, holding her hands out, as though she could reach into the shadows themselves. Her senses extended, weaving through the threads of the curse, trying to understand it, to control it. She felt the cold pulse of its power, its hunger, and her resolve hardened. She would not let it harm the king, not now, not ever. The shadows surged suddenly, twisting into shapes that were almost human, almost monstrous. They lunged toward Kaelric, tendrils of darkness curling around him. Lasara's heart leapt, and instinct took over. She extended her senses, guiding the shadows away with a force she did not fully understand, her body trembling with the effort. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice strong despite the fear coiling in her chest. "I can hold it, but I need you to trust me." Kaelric did not hesitate. He stepped behind her, placing himself between her and the approaching shadows, his presence steady, grounding. "I trust you," he said. The words, a quiet vow, that echoed in the chamber. The shadows hissed and writhed, testing her control, probing for weakness. Lasara felt herself faltering under the strain. Her knees threatened to buckle, and her breaths came shallow and fast, but she could not stop. She would not let the darkness win. Drawing on every ounce of her courage, she focused, allowing her senses to blend with the magic of the room. The shadows recoiled, then surged again, and she directed them, bending their movement, shaping their attack. It was exhausting, yet thrilling. A dangerous dance of power and instinct. The king's voice cut through the tension. "Lasara, now!" She turned slightly, sensing his presence, and with a surge of determination, she pushed the shadows back, forcing them to collapse inward, shrinking them until they were nothing more than whispers and cold air. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting, leaving only the faint scent of ancient magic lingering like smoke. Lasara's body sagged, drained but victorious. She looked at the king, her chest heaving, sweat on her brow. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on her with a mixture of awe and something deeper, more intimate. "You were magnificent," he said softly. She lowered her eyes, uncertain how to respond. Praise from the Alpha King was rare, and to hear it directed at her, to feel the weight of his acknowledgement, left her both exhilarated and nervous. I only did what I could," she whispered. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, yet it carried a weight that made her heart race. "No," he said firmly. "You did more than that. You saved me. And perhaps, Lasara, you saved more than just me tonight." The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning. She felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of pride, fear, and a strange, thrilling hope. For a moment, the world outside the chamber disappeared. The distant music, the flickering torches, the castle itself all faded into the background. There was only the king, the shadows, and the fragile, growing bond between them. But the night was not done. A faint, alien scent drifted in from the corridor, a cold, sharp trace that sent a shiver down her spine. Lasara inhaled, recognizing it immediately. Someone, or something, was still moving within the castle. The danger was far from over. The king noticed her pause. "You sense it," he said, his tone a mixture of curiosity and caution. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, it is close. Closer than I thought. We are not safe yet." His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. "Then we prepare. Together," he said again. And this time the words felt like a vow. The bond between them was no longer fragile. It had been tested in the crucible of shadow and danger, and had endured. Lasara felt a thrill of determination. She had always believed her gift was a burden, a quiet power no one noticed. But now, she understood its value, its strength. And she understood something else. That the connection forming between her and the Alpha King was rare. Forged in trust and bravery, and perhaps destined. As they moved silently back into the corridors, the castle seemed to hold its breath. Every shadow was a threat, every whisper, a secret waiting to be revealed. Lysara's senses were alive, attuned to the faintest trace of danger, and she knew that the night's trials were far from over. And in the quiet, she whispered to herself, as much a promise as a warning. I will not fail. I will protect him, no matter what comes next. The storm outside rumbled, and the castle trembled under its own ancient weight. Somewhere in the shadows, the unseen enemy watched, waiting. And Lysara knew that the final test was yet to come. The castle of Velroth seemed to hold its breath, as though even the stones knew the storm was far from over. The corridors were silent now, save for the faint echo of their footsteps. Lysara's senses were sharp, every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of movement reaching her before it could reach them. The faint, bitter scent of danger lingered, stronger than ever, pressing against her chest like a living thing. King Caelric walked beside her, calm and steady as ever. Yet Lysara could feel the tension coiled beneath his measured steps. He trusted her instincts, and she trusted herself, yet both knew that the final trial awaited them in the heart of the castle, where shadows gathered thickest, and where old magic had lain waiting for centuries. This way, Lysara whispered, guiding him toward the northern tower once more. The curse. It calls to you. It wants you. I can feel it reaching through the walls, through the very stones. The king's eyes narrowed, sharp and unyielding. Then we face it. Together, he said, his voice steady. A vow of protection and trust. He did not flinch, though the tension in the air pressed against him. Lysara's heart tightened at his courage, and a strange warmth filled her chest, a mix of admiration, fear, and a quiet, growing affection she dared not yet name. As they ascended the spiral staircase, the air grew colder, heavier. The shadows around them shifted unnaturally, crawling along the walls, moving like smoke without wind. Lysara's gift allowed her to sense the threads of ancient magic that wove through the castle. A dark pattern that twisted around the king. The curse was alive, sentient, and hungry. At the top of the tower, the chamber doors stood tall and imposing, carved with runes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Lysara's heart pounded. She could feel the weight of centuries pressing down, the curse thrumming in the stones, eager to claim its target. She inhaled sharply, centering herself. Stay behind me, she whispered, though she knew the king would not move without her. I am with you, he said quietly, and there was no hesitation in his voice. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight she could feel deep in her bones. The bond between them, forged in trust and danger, was now undeniable, a force stronger than fear itself. She pressed her hand to the door, inhaling the scents that lingered beyond. The air was thick with the bitter tang of ancient magic and the metallic trace of danger. She could feel the shadows shifting, moving closer, preparing to strike. With a trembling hand, she pushed the doors open. The chamber beyond was vast, lined with mirrors that reflected not their images, but shadows that moved independently, writhing and twisting. The king stepped forward, his presence commanding even the dark forces around them. Lysara followed, heart steadying as she sensed the threads of magic winding through the room. The curse manifested suddenly, a surge of shadows coalescing into a towering form. Its presence was cold and oppressive, a hunger that sought to consume both body and spirit. It lunged toward Caelric, and Lysara reacted instantly, stepping forward, extending her senses, reaching into the threads of magic, guiding the shadows, trying to protect him. Hold it, she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. I can control it, but I cannot hold it for long. The king drew his sword, a blade that gleamed even in the dim light, and advanced into the shadows with calm precision. Then, we fight it together, he said, his voice a steady anchor against the storm of darkness. Lysara concentrated, channeling her gift in a way she had never dared before. She could feel the curse resisting, probing for weakness, testing her limits. Her body shook with the effort, yet she did not falter. Every sense was alive, guiding her, weaving through the shadows, bending their movement, shaping their attack. The king met the shadows head-on, his sword slicing through the darkness. Light meeting shadow in a clash of force and will. Lysara's control faltered briefly, and a tendril of darkness brushed against the king, but he stood firm, his presence steady and unwavering. She drew on his courage, letting it strengthen her, letting it guide her hand. "Focus," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You are stronger than it knows. Trust yourself." She inhaled sharply, centering herself, and pushed back against the curse with all her strength. The shadows shrieked, hissing and writhing as if in pain. Lysara could feel them weaken, their threads unraveling under her control. The room pulsed, the mirrors quivering as if reacting to the battle. With a final surge, Lysara directed the shadows into themselves, forcing the curse to collapse inward. The room fell silent. The oppressive weight lifted, leaving only the faintest trace of cold air and the lingering scent of ancient magic. She sank to her knees, trembling, her body drained but victorious. The king stepped forward, his hand reaching for her. She looked up, and their eyes met his fierce and steady, hers wide with awe and relief. "You did it," he said softly. "You held it. You saved me. And perhaps the entire kingdom. I could not have done it without you," she whispered, her voice trembling. The words were true in more ways than one. His presence, his strength, his trust, it had all guided her through the darkness. He knelt beside her, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No," he said firmly. "You did more than survive. You commanded the darkness. You faced it. And you emerged stronger." Lysara felt warmth flood her chest. The fear, the exhaustion, the tension, all of it melted under the weight of his words, his presence, and the bond that had grown between them. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she was not just a quiet Omega, unnoticed and overlooked, but someone who could stand beside the Alpha King, not in shadow, but in strength. The king's eyes softened, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "Lysara," he said quietly, his voice low and intimate. "I have underestimated more than your gift tonight. I have underestimated you, and perhaps myself, in feeling this bond with you." Her heart leapt, but she did not speak. Words seemed inadequate to express the depth of what she felt. Instead, she reached out, her hand brushing his, and he took it in his, strong and steady. The connection between them was undeniable, a tether forged in trust, courage, and shared danger. For a long moment, they simply held each other's gaze, the shadows of the chamber retreating into corners, powerless against the force they had formed together. The castle outside seemed distant, irrelevant. There was only them, bound by fate, courage, and the quiet strength of a shy Omega who had dared to stand beside her Alpha King. But even in the calm, Lysara's senses detected something faint, almost imperceptible. A trace of a scent, sharp and alien, lingering just beyond the chamber. She stiffened, her instincts alert. The danger may have been vanquished, but the night was not yet over. The king noticed, his brow furrowing. "You sense it still?" She nodded. "Yes, faint, but it is there. Perhaps it is watching, waiting. The curse may be gone, but other forces, unseen forces, are still at work." He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Then we face them, as we have faced everything else. Together." "Why?" She drew strength from his words, from his presence, from the bond that had grown between them. She realized that her courage, her gift, and her heart had been enough to stand against the darkness, and that with the king at her side, nothing could truly overwhelm them. Together, they descended from the tower, the first hints of dawn brushing the horizon. The castle seemed to breathe again, the shadows retreating into corners. The weight of ancient magic lifting. Lysara walked beside the king, her hand brushing his, and felt a quiet thrill of triumph and belonging. The battle was over. The curse vanquished. But the connection between them was only beginning. They had faced fear, darkness, and ancient power together, and emerged not only alive, but stronger, bound by trust, courage, and something far deeper than either had expected. As they reached the great hall, sunlight spilling through the windows, Lysara inhaled deeply, tasting the air, aware of every scent, every shift, every hint of the world around her. She had survived, she had protected the king, and she had discovered a strength within herself she had never known. The king looked down at her, his expression soft but resolute. "You are extraordinary, Lysara," he said. "Never doubt your strength, and never doubt the bond we share." She met his gaze, a quiet smile forming. "I will not," she whispered, "and I will stand by you, always." Even as they moved forward together, she felt a faint trace of something in the air, distant, but not threatening. A reminder that in Velrath, shadows always lingered, and that courage, trust, and love were the only shields against the darkness. And with the king by her side, Lysara knew they could face anything, together.